As the war in the Middle East enters its third week, the images tell a story that no press release can spin. Satellite photographs now show smoke rising from the strategic port of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, a vital hub for global oil shipments, now burning. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, is no longer a waterway. It has become a front line. Here is the image that Washington did not anticipate. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, begging for help. 10 countries were asked to join a naval coalition to secure the strait. The same 10 countries said no. France refused, Australia declined, Japan rejected deployment, the United Kingdom, historic ally, Washington's most reliable ally, is reluctant. Germany has not even responded, Qatar refused, China rejects any military involvement, and even South Korea is only examining the proposal. Clausewitz wrote that war is a clash of opposing wills. 3 weeks in, the question is no longer who has the stronger military, the question is who can endure the longest. And as the world watches America beg while Iran filters the flow of oil through Hormuz, threatening to accept only payments in Chinese yuan, we must ask, is this the moment the global order shifted? From Tehran to Beirut to Gaza to the Gulf countries, the war is expanding. Iranian humanitarian organizations report tens of thousands of civilian infrastructure sites destroyed. Lebanon, already in economic collapse, sees 822,000 displaced and 23 killed in a single day, including 12 medical personnel. And in the background, the war in Ukraine, the forgotten war, watches as Western attention and ammunitions are diverted to a new front. This is All 24 News Special. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's special coverage. And before we bring in our guests to understand the magnitude of what has happened in the past 3 weeks, our own Zahra Farjani has compiled this report for us. Let's watch and then come back.
Tensions continue to escalate between Iran, the United States and the Zionist entity as both sides exchange strikes and threats amid the ongoing war. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced launching the 56th wave of Operation True Promise 4, targeting weapons production sites and aviation fuel centers in Hafan, Lod Airport in the occupied Palestinian territories. The IRGC also said the strikes targeted U.S. military facilities in the region, including a Dhafra Air Base in the UAE and the Jafar Naval Base and Sheikh Isa Air Base in Bahrain, using hypersonic and medium-range missiles as well as drones. Meanwhile, U.S. Zionist warplanes carried out airstrikes on several Iranian cities, including Tehran and Markazi province. Iranian media reported casualties after a strike on a school in the city of Khomeini, while other attacks hit residential areas in Tehran and Tabriz. Iran also said its air defenses intercepted and destroyed a Heron drone over Tehran. In Washington, however, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed ongoing talks with Iran but questioned Tehran's readiness to reach a deal. Trump also threatened additional strikes on Kark Island, a key Iranian oil hub, while criticizing allies for what he described as a lack of support to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
We strongly encourage the other nations to get involved with us and get involved quickly and with great enthusiasm. I have that from a number of them, and I'd like to say their names, but frankly, I don't know if they would want me to or not, because maybe they don't want to be targeted. But I say, wouldn't matter if you're targeted or not, because this is a paper tiger that we're dealing with now. It wasn't a paper tiger 2 weeks ago, it's a paper tiger now.
For his part, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran is ready to continue the war against the United States and the Zionist entity unless guarantees are given to prevent further attacks.
We haven't sent any message and we are not requesting a ceasefire, but this war must end on the condition that it will not happen again. If we say we don't want a ceasefire, it's not because we are seeking war, but because this time it must end in a way that ensures our enemies never think of repeating these attacks and aggressions. I believe they have now learned the lesson and realized the kind of country they are dealing with. A country that doesn't hesitate to defend itself and is ready to pursue the war wherever it may lead and continue it for as long as necessary.
The latest strikes and statements highlight the growing risk of a wider regional escalation. The war that was supposed to last weeks is now open-ended, and the world is holding its breath.
And to dissect the third week of this war, we are joined by four distinguished experts. From Washington, D.C. is Dr. Edmund Gharib, Professor of Middle East History and Politics at American University. Dr. Gharib has spent decades analyzing U.S. policy in the region and will help us understand how America arrived at this moment of isolation. Dr. Gharib, thank you indeed for agreeing to be with us tonight.
Thank you.
And from London is Dr. Anas Takriti, founder and CEO of the Cordoba Foundation, political analyst and commentator on Middle East affairs. Dr. Takriti brings deep insight into regional dynamics, the humanitarian catastrophe, and the shifting perceptions of the West in the Muslim world. Dr. Anas, thank you for agreeing to be with us tonight.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Pleasure is all ours. And from Los Angeles, returning to our program is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean and Professor of International Studies at California State University. Dr. Salhi will guide us through the international law dimensions and the strategic failures of U.S. foreign policy. Dr. Hamoud, thank you indeed for agreeing to be with us.
My pleasure, Karim, and it's an honor to be with your two guests, Takriti and Edmund.
Thank you indeed. And from London is Mr. Lawrence Walker, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Montel News, an energy markets journalist who tracks the global flows of oil and gas. Mr. Lawrence will help us understand what is happening to prices, supplies, and the energy security of nations. Thank you so much, Mr. Walker, for agreeing to be with us tonight as well.
Thank you very much. It's likewise a pleasure to join you today.
The pleasure is all ours. So let's begin with diplomacy. The United States asked 10 countries to join a naval coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz. 10 countries said no. France refused. Australia declined. Japan rejected deployment. The UK is reluctant. Germany is even silent. Qatar refused as well. China rejects involvement. South Korea is only examining. This is not a coalition of the willing. It is a coalition of the unwilling, let's say. So my question goes to you, Dr. Gharib. You are in Washington and you have watched U.S. diplomacy for decades. When has America ever been so isolated? When has a U.S. president begged for help and been met with silence? What does this say about the state of American leadership, and how did we even get here?
Clearly, I think that the situation is unusual. There's no doubt about that. We haven't seen or witnessed developments like the ones we have been seeing in the United States for a very, very long time. You have to go back to maybe during a certain period of the 19th century. But there has been, it did not start, what we are seeing now did not start with President Trump, although he, I think, elevated it to a certain levels unprecedented. What we have seen is that since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of the United States as a unipolar power, there has been a lot of changes taking place in the United States in terms of a lot of companies, which are some of the huge companies who have sent, started opening factories in China, in Vietnam, in Mexico, other places. The United States was moving from being an industrial society to a technological and a services society to a large extent, and that has already began to change a lot of things all over the world. We saw the rise of China, and we are seeing we saw the return of Russia to a large extent, and the rise of other powers. You have India, you have Brazil, you have a number of other countries. But within the United States, there have been also a number of developments which began in the 90s, especially when we saw at that time the emergence of very powerful politicians from third parties who were challenging the system. What was happening is that a lot of Americans began to believe that Washington was no longer representing them. There were many reasons that led them to this. First, there was the emergence of a certain class, or some call it also the deep state, and that began to really be the dominant players in the United States. We began to see that only about 1% of the Americans, maybe 1,500 families, own more than half of the poorer, the 50% poorer population, middle class and lower middle class and poor classes. We also began to see that there is a great deal of interventions, military interventions, which have not led to the victories that some believed, whether it was basically almost going back to the Korean War and then the Vietnam War, then the more recent wars in the Middle East, whether it's the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the Libya War, and the involvement in Somalia and other regions. And then now, of course, we see this current war that's been taking place. We saw also the increasing the reliance on the military power of the United States and the belief that the U.S. could do whatever it wants, whatever it saw is serving its interests. That was also beginning to happen. In fact, we saw that the United States was spending over $1 trillion, and now more recently, President Trump is asking for $500 billion more. So that's another issue that has begun to influence also public opinion. But I think President Trump, as I said earlier, has his own way of looking at things, and this has brought a lot of problems to the United States, a lot of tensions. In a way, he won because he was popular. He was able to reach those people who are very unhappy with the policies of the United States, and he spoke to them. He told them, for example, we are not going to be involved in unending wars all over the world. We are going to stop that because that was not in the interest of the United States. He said, we will not interfere, basically, but we will put America first. We'll defend America's interests first. And that is something that actually many, including some within the what's known as the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, we began to see some of the individuals, including people who have played a major role in helping President Trump reach power, make it to the White House, the second term and the first term, some of them, we began to see some of these people turn against President Trump. People like not necessarily maybe the person, but against the policies. We saw someone like Tucker Carlson, who was a conservative, very popular journalist in the United States. He was one of the leading figures. The millions follow him. He has been saying recently, is it in the United States' interest to fight wars for Israel while we are the ones who pay the price? You told us that you were going to avoid these wars. There was someone like Congresswoman Margaret Taylor Greene, who was also a very, very strong defender and supporter of the president and was very active in his campaign, who also turned against him, partly because of that and partly because I think the Epstein files. There were others such as Steve Bannon, who was another prominent figure who supported the president during his first term and was one of his top advisors, and he supported him more recently. And there are many others who have moved away, but yet the president still has a base. He has strong support. He's very good in reaching out to people and to telling them sometimes what they would like to hear. But I think what has been happening recently is turning a lot of people against him, and we're seeing this through the polls that have taken place. Something like only 43% of the people supported his war against Iraq, while 53%, according to one poll, 55%, according to another, were very much opposed. There are about more than 2/3 of the American people are opposed to sending military forces to Iran. So these reflect actually the changes that have been taking place and dissatisfaction. Also, many are concerned about the cost of living, especially people in middle class, lower middle class, poor people are facing serious difficulties. We've seen what's happened just recently with the rise of the oil prices. Within couple of days, oil prices went up, to $1 higher than they were previously. And all of this is beginning, I think, to have this kind of reaction that you're seeing more and more people who are dissatisfied with the policies pursued by the president. There's a congressman, I think, running in the state of Florida, who recently put as his main slogan, I am not willing to see one American soldier die because of Israel. That's another factor that also has become a factor among Americans. For the first time in history, you see more Americans more sympathetic to the Palestinians than they are sympathetic to the Israelis.
Thank you indeed. And perhaps a lot of factors that are making the coalition countries or the ally countries scared that they would have the same perhaps reactions domestically. And here, this leads me to the next question to Dr. Al-Tikriti. You are there based in London and you can observe Western policy closely there. So can you tell us maybe the incident where Marco Rubio told allies in Munich that they are not allies. Now we see America is the one needing them. And is this simply karma, according to you, or maybe there is a deeper structural shift, a recognition that the post-1945, perhaps, alliance system is no longer fit for purpose? How do you read it yourself?
I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that the way things are currently going, the whole system that we've known since the Second World War is in crisis. I don't think that anyone would defy the fact or deny the fact that we are in crisis mode, and the fact that just as we heard from Dr. Gharib, that the state of affairs in America and how President Trump and his administration are behaving, I think that casts a long shadow on what we used to know as the international community or even international law. And to be perfectly honest, I think that this is a natural progression from where we found ourselves almost all of a sudden over the past 2.5 years since the beginning of the genocide in Gaza. And, since international law became so irrelevant, international institutions such as the ICC and the ICJ almost, negligible. Even the United Nations, by the way, I mean, despite it convening a few days ago, but that was the very first time that the United Nations was even mentioned, despite the war now being, it was back then around 8 or 9 days old. So bit by bit, what is happening is something quite notable on the global scene, and that is the crumbling or the decay and corrosion of what we used to know and what we used to refer to as the international community and definitely international law. And what is happening in America, and if the United States isn't careful, this won't just end in an embarrassment, and the possibility or potential for it being an embarrassment is still there. But the fear is that this will have its reverberations within America itself, and not just in terms of the low popularity of the president or the administration, not just a sizable contingent of the MAGA constituency turning against Trump. Not just that, but maybe even something more, particularly when the impact of rising energy prices starts to hit ordinary people in their everyday existence. Right now, for instance, the fuel prices jumped, but people still won't feel the full veracity of their domestic energy price rises for another maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Once that happens, it'll be seriously interested in when, and if that coincides with this war still ongoing until then, and probably more American soldiers falling as a result of this war, then I think that we're going to see something quite interesting happening within America itself that might transform the reality of America into something that we never came to expect. The fact is that this war was ill thought and it was ill prepared. And those whom Rubio sort of cascated for refusing to be at the beck and call of the American administration are countries that still hold a remnants of diplomacy and understand that this is not how you fight a war. You fight a war, first of all, by creating a coalition before you engage. You fight a war by outlining what the strategy is. You fight a war by saying what your exit strategy is going to be. Okay, so if your strategic objectives aren't achieved in the first few days or weeks or whatever, how are you going to get out? So none of that was done. All of a sudden, one day we find that the Americans have launched an attack with the Israelis on Iran. And the fact that the most potent element of this war was not even considered, and that is the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the greatest tools within the armor of Iran, and how it could use that in a way to absolutely strangulate not only every single shipment that emerges from the Gulf. We're talking about a sizable portion of world trade coming to be strangulated by the fact that you only need a few small boats to target the large cargo ships and fuel carriers, and that's it. No one else will move. No one will insure those carriers and be comfortable with paying out compensation for that kind of situation. The fact that no one within the administration even considered how to overcome such an obstacle, that Iran is within reach of American targets in the Gulf countries that could be and have proven to be within its range, within its missile range. I mean, it's something that boggles the mind, to be perfectly honest. And like I said, I think that we are in crisis mode. I think that what we used to know as the international community is at its end, it seems. And it seems that the Western Hemisphere, which used to always pose as being anti the Eastern Bloc, see with suspicion Russia and China and those emerging Southern Hemisphere powers with suspicion, is now no longer, because of obviously the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing from the White House, lambasting anyone who dares consider their own interests. I mean, when Keir Starmer, for instance, when he says we are not going to enter into a wider war with Iran, he's considering the interests of the United Kingdom. But unfortunately, with Trump being in the White House, that seems to be an affront that he's not willing to accept.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. And now, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, there is this concept called hegemonic stability theory, that is, the idea that a single dominant power provides public goods like maritime security in exchange for compliance. Now, if the hegemon can no longer provide security, and if no one is willing to help, what replaces it? Chaos, or a multipolar order, or something else?
Well, technically, the theory is based on international collaboration. That is, the parties cooperating under the idea that the sphere where they are collaborating is public goods. it also assumes that all the parties are mutually benefiting from these interactions, and that the hegemon is leading in that perspective. What this tells you, the collapse of this system, or what we've seen today, is a collapse of the international liberal theory, international liberal economic theory as well, where the interest of one dominant power overlaps or takes over the rest of the interest. And what is appalling is that the other actors stay idle, not doing anything. And it poses the question, is the international order, this international economic order that is supposed to be liberal, where the movement of goods, with the goods are moving freely, ideas, services, all of that, have we reached the end of it? Because when you have Washington imposing high tariffs, disturbing the international order that was, to many, putting the America at the top of that economic order, meaning that it was economically powerful and was seen as the major economic power. Suddenly, you have a president who comes in and change all of that. Is it the result of a Trumpian decision? Or is it part of a system that the United States is engaged in? Certainly the transformation to artificial intelligence, what Dr. Reeb talked about, has a lot of validity here, is that we are in transition phase, and that phase may sort of lead us to take certain actions. But the way this administration took the international order to benefit its own and impose on its hegemonic ideas and principle, or whatever they were looking, was leading to a disaster. What we've seen today in Hormuz and what's happening in this war is a clear indication that that system, that economic freedom that the United States has, or that control of the economic power, is no longer under its hand. Iran has been able to manipulate and create or put Iran, the United States and Israel in a position of what some referring as the escalation trap, meaning what Iranians did is making this the problem of economics or the problem of energy no longer just a problem of the United States, but it's the entire world. More than anything else, they have been able to orchestrate the world and place the world against the Israelis and the Americans, because the common interest here is that the oil prices will damage everybody. I think what I'm leading to is that what we've seen in recent weeks or so is that, and also if we go back to since the current administration came to power, is a disregard for international economic order, and needless to say, the morality of international order. Gaza is a clear example there. The double standard that we've seen, for example, on the one hand, the Americans are pushing, or the Westerners are pushing for certain kind of rights to the Ukraine, and not undermining that conflict, but denying the same to the Palestinians. What's happening today in Lebanon is ignored, and most of you have an evacuation of over 1 million people were evacuated, and yet the emphasis on the other side, that Iranian being the attacker here. Mm-hmm. So that theory has a lot of limits, but certainly it can explain a little bit what we're seeing today.
Thank you indeed. And since we are talking about economy, Mr. Walker, Lawrence Walker, this question is for you. And from an energy markets perspective, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a waterway. It is the world's most important energy choke point. So if the United States cannot secure it, and if no coalition exists to replace it, how do markets price that? What is the risk premium on every barrel of oil when the world's superpower is diplomatically isolated, let's say?
Yes, I mean this is certainly a situation that the oil and gas markets have really hoped would never happen. If it's perhaps not the worst case scenario, but it's definitely one of the worst case scenarios that people have been pondering. I think there was perhaps a level of complacency leading up to this conflict. There was, I was at an event in Qatar about a month ago, and then still it was seen as fairly unlikely that the Strait of Hormuz would actually be effectively close as it has now. I think what we're looking, obviously, we've seen massive price volatility over the past couple of weeks. We've seen prices, oil jump to 4-year highs, gas, benchmark European gas prices jump to 3-year highs. This price premium will remain. I think, again, as you mentioned also earlier about the reluctance to come and help sort of open up the strait from allies of the US. I think again there's a lot of there's a lack of understanding of quite how this would actually happen. Again, we speak with ship owners and ship brokers. There's no they do not want to put ships through the strait. They're worried about the safety of the crew. They're worried about what can happen to them. Yes, you may have insurance. You may have war insurance, even your premium. That doesn't help if your crew is hit and killed. So I think it's going to be a very complicated thing, be a very long drawn out thing. In terms of how does the market price it in, I mean, if this is a prolonged thing, then this premium will just become part of the price. We'll just have to start paying more until there is some resolution. But yes, there's a long way to go for now.
Yeah, but then, Mr. Lawrence, when we talk about what is actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has not just blockaded the strait, they are actually filtering it. Reports are indicating that Iran is preparing a measure that could upend global finance, allowing, that is, tankers to pass through the strait only if their cargo is paid for in Chinese yuan, not in US dollars. So this would be a direct assault on the petrodollar system. So, Mr. Lawrence Walker, you track energy markets, and if Iran implements this policy, what do you think would happen? China is already Iran's largest oil customer. At least 11 million barrels have transited since the conflict began. And if all Iranian oil is priced in yuan, and if Iran begins demanding yuan for passage, does the petrodollar simply die? And what does that do to the US economy, according to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the petrodollar would die as such. I mean, I think something like 80% of the world's oil is traded in US dollars at the moment. Yes, there may be 5-10% at the moment in yuan. This is predominantly, I suppose, at the moment, Russian oil being sold to China. And obviously, China is very keen for more trade to be done in its own currency as well, for obvious reasons. I think if it's just Iran alone, that would not be enough to, it will perhaps spook the market. We'll see price volatility as a result of this. But Iran, accounts for 3-4% of global oil. You need to see the bigger people, the Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, others doing that as well before I think it would become more of a threat to the petro dollar as such. But I mean, it's certainly, it's a symbolic hit, certainly, and it will make people think. Yes, that's what.
Thank you indeed. Now, Dr. Gharib, the petrodollar system was established in the 1970s when the US promised Saudi Arabia security in exchange for pricing oil in dollars. Now, that security guarantee seems now in tatters. So if Gulf states see that the US cannot actually protect them and that China can offer energy security through yuan payments, let's say, does the entire house of cards collapse?
That's a very good question. I think a great deal will depend, for example, on what's likely to happen now, how this war is going to end. I mean, but this by itself is not going to be enough to sustain the petrodollar, because what we have been seeing is that more and more countries are actually beginning to trade and use their own currencies, or they're using the yuan or the ruble or the rupees. For example, trade between India and Russia, they have been, a good chunk of them has been in their local currencies. And that also the same to a certain extent between Russia and China. We've seen that a number of Gulf countries are beginning to look towards China and to a lesser extent Russia. For example, we saw that it was China which played a role in trying to bring together Iran and Saudi Arabia. And in fact, that primarily, why did that happen? Why did the Saudis seem to be moving in the direction of China and accepted China's mediation? Part of it had to do because of what happened when there was an attack on the Aramco oil fields, and they felt that the United States did not come to their support, and that began to have its own reaction. Nevertheless, most of the Gulf countries continued to rely on the United States, and the petrodollar there was extremely important. But nevertheless, this is something that is changing. The world is changing now. And I think part of the struggle, in addition, there are different dimensions. There's a regional part of it that has to do with the struggle. Israel has been pushing for war with Iran, as it did before that. It pushed for a war with Iraq in the 1990s, and ultimately succeeded in that and helped bring the regime down. At the same time, the next target has been Iran. There was a report that was done. General Wesley Clark, who was the commander of NATO in Europe, after he finished his service there, he later was a candidate for the presidency. He didn't get very far, but he was visiting a friend of his at the Pentagon after he returned, a senior official. And so he was asking him, what's going on now? It seems that we are winning, we can win military victories, but we cannot win strategically. And so his friend got up, locked the door, pulled a piece of paper from his desk, and gave it to him. He said, read it. And on that paper, according to General Clark, there were 7 countries which were targeted by the United States and there should be regime change. Among them were Iran, Iraq, Syria, a number of other countries. And this is what Netanyahu has been pushing for. Netanyahu has succeeded in influencing the U.S. president to make him and some of his advisors as well made him believe that this war is winnable, that Iran poses a threat. Although, again, we are hearing a lot of propaganda as we hear it from all the sides. But one of the things that we heard, for example, that Iran was within a week of making a nuclear bomb. This is according to Witkoff, who was the diplomat he was not a diplomat, but he was undertaking diplomatic efforts to end the conflict with Iran, along with the son-in-law of President Trump. So what we are seeing here is that, for example, the president said also that Iran, and some of his aides said, is capable of launching missiles hitting the United States. These, of course, many criticize this here and question them. Nevertheless, some believe them, and this was part of the support that brought the support to the president and to his policies. So what we are seeing is that there are serious challenges. Now we are beginning to see, hearing criticism that the president did not have a clear strategy of how to get out of this war, that he did not understand the challenges that Iran could pose, and that the belief that once the U.S. starts attacking and decapitating the leadership, there would be an uprising. That didn't happen. We saw demonstrations taking place, but it didn't work. Nevertheless, that the belief was that this would lead to the collapse of the regime, and it did not happen. So these are questions, some of the questions that are being raised now, and which raise questions about how this war is likely to end.
Thank you indeed. A lot of things were unexpected. And here, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, from an international law perspective, do you think this is legal, a sovereign nation controlling its territorial waters and imposing conditions on passage? Meaning Iran claims it is not blockading, it is simply asserting its rights. How do US allies like Japan and South Korea, which depend on this oil, respond to a demand to pay in yuan?
Well, the law is clear. This is under maritime law, which allows up to 12 kilometers, except the United States may have more, 120 or 200 kilometers inside the sea. It's well within that contour. And then there are speculation that those rights also assumes that the passage will be allowed and so on and so forth. But it is within Iran's right to impose which currency it can receive in exchange for the passageway, just as the other countries can do the same, refuse or accept. So from that perspective, we are well within international law. This is beyond that. This is what we've seen, and it has become more of a normal thing, that when Western interests are attacked, we tend to call on the international law. But when the global south or Palestinians, or for this matter, Iranians in this case, we tend to forget. This double standard is not new, and it doesn't surprise anyone that the international order, as we see it today, has a major problem. The problem is that there are some countries that are treated differently from the others, that there is racism in looking at how countries are presented, are treated, and international law has to sort of be changed. The whole structure of the United Nations Security Council is not fair to many people. It's an ethnocentric, westernized system that serves the Western world. So whether the Korean have their own rights, and the Japanese or which country is going to pass through that, it's within their rights to say yes or no. But the international law, maritime law, to the best of my understanding, gives the Iranians the right to control the strait.
Thank you indeed. And now the question goes to you, Dr. Takriti. If we look at it, there is a political dimension to this, and the Arab street is watching. Their governments are allied with the US, but the US cannot protect them. Iranian drones hit Fujairah. Saudi Arabia intercept missiles over its territory. So if the alternative is a China-backed order that actually delivers energy security, how long before public opinion in the Gulf countries, for example, forces a realignment, I'm saying?
Yes, I mean, I think that the United States stands at risk of many things unraveling. And not only, as I said earlier, just an embarrassing escapade that might end even, let's assume, with the weakening of the Iranian regime, but with America actually achieving no strategic advantages whatsoever. Besides that, the unraveling of that kind of alliance that it had built, invested in, and utilized for decades now, including the installation of whether it be military bases, or whether it be intelligence bases, or whether it be refineries or the like along the Persian Gulf. All this is coming to be seen not as something that protects and shields those Gulf countries from being attacked, as it was assumed, but rather as a red herring, or some sort of red flag to the bull, whereby it becomes more vulnerable to being attacked as a result of those American installations. So bit by bit, this is proving to be extremely costly, and we're not talking just about the missiles or the drones or the personnel that are being lost to this futile escapade, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if I was in America, I would be wondering exactly why it is that my own brethren are thousands of miles away fighting a war which wouldn't prevent any harm from me, direct harm that I'm exposed to, nor would it bring any direct advantage to myself, yet it's costing me so much. So the issue is, and where we stand today, is that the price of this might be extremely dear, and would include the image of the United States. You see, one of the greatest assets of the United States over the course of the past 40, 50 years, is its invincibility. That is now coming to be highly eroded. America has been working for decades to repair its image since Vietnam. This might peg it back several steps as a result of something that was ill thought, ill strategized. No one was consulted. And now, I mean, the American president, as well as his senior advisors, spend their times and their press conferences lambasting all those who do not come running simply because they are telling them to. It's something that is of a, I have to say, quite an entertaining spectacle to someone like myself, who's a mere analyst. But I'm guessing that for people who are being hit by the collapse of this system that was so robust as we thought it to be, this is going to be quite, quite hurtful. And imagine this. I mean, one of the issues that I fear might happen, and we're actually seeing and observing happen, is that the space for freedoms and expressions of views and opinions. I mean, we noticed over the course of the Gaza genocide how that was restricted bit by bit systematically. But now what we're seeing is journalists who represent major platforms cannot dare ask senior officials in the administration, let alone the president himself, any question of value to the American people. Otherwise, they'd be told they're ugly. They would be told they're unpatriotic. They would be told that they represent a TV station or a paper that the license of which should be withdrawn. And all of a sudden, every single press conference becomes a spectacle, and become somewhere where seasoned journalists cannot express themselves, cannot cite the questions and the queries that ordinary Americans wish to cite to the administration, asking how, why, what is the reason behind this. So I think that the cost of this will far outgrow and far outreach the mere military. For the Arab countries and the Arab people, I think that we are living in a world that is in flux, not only in terms of alliances and coalitions, but also in terms of standings. I think that now more and more Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries, not only Arab countries, are now seeing that they cannot rely on the United States anymore. They cannot depend for their security and stability on the United States. And that brings with it a lot of change, I expect.
And since you mentioned the Middle East countries, let's speak a little bit about the forgotten fronts. And here, to be precise, what's happening in Lebanon and in Gaza. While the world focuses on the Strait of Hormuz and the oil markets, the human cost continues to mount. So in Lebanon, for example, occupation airstrikes killed at least 23 people on Saturday, including 12 medical personnel. More than 822,000 people, including nearly 300,000 children, have been displaced. In Gaza, the humanitarian situation, already catastrophic, deteriorates further with each passing day as the war expands. So, Dr. At-Tikriti, you work on humanitarian issues and have deep connections in the region. So describe for our viewers what is really happening in Lebanon right now, a country that was already in economic collapse, banks frozen, currency almost worthless, which is now hosting nearly 1 million displaced people while being bombed. Also, what is the reality on the ground, as you gather?
You have to understand, I mean, obviously this is quite a complex picture, but to try to put it simply, I mean, on one hand, you have Lebanon, a country that now for decades has been fragmented by war, internal crises, infighting, sectarianism, all sorts of corruption, economic failure, dependency, absolute reliance on neighboring countries for its sustenance. It's a bit of a mess, I have to say. And on the other side, and this is, basically, I don't know whether it's the elephant in the room, but I'm pretty sure that now most people now recognize that the issue is Israel, and the problem is Israel, and Israel cannot allow its borders to be surrounded by any country of any integrity, of any worth. That's now a fact. It might have been something that we don't speak of in light of the peace agreements either with Jordan or with Egypt in the past. But I think that the past few years have really led everyone to ask questions about what does Israel really stand for. And recent interviews by people like Tucker Carlson, who was mentioned by Mr. Gharib earlier, with Mike Huckabee and with others from the Israeli side, show clearly that the ambitions of the Israelis is not to arrive at peace, is not to sign peace treaties, but rather to expand and to dominate. And as Netanyahu himself said, that the American-led war on Iran is a dream that he's been harboring for more than 40 years, and that now he is seeing being realized. And that is what I think the people and the states, the regimes of the region need to understand, that you cannot be in the vicinity of Israel and then hope to have any kind of stability, any kind of security, any kind of self-dependence, self-reliance. You can't. You're not allowed to. And Lebanon is merely an example of that. I mean, the incidents of incursions, whether by the Israelis or in the past by the former Syrian regime, or are well documented. And unfortunately, this has left a country that is deeply, deeply divided and deeply fragmented. Obviously, Israel will forever want to dominate and become the dominant force in its northern borders, and therefore the south of Lebanon will forever be a war zone. And the fact that we have elements like Hezbollah who have also for whatever intentions or purposes, but have also added to the undermining of the Lebanese state, doesn't help.
True. And Dr. Gharib, you have watched Lebanon suffer through civil war as well as occupation invasions, and now this. So Hezbollah, far from being decapitated, is launching air attacks in a single day. The narrative that the resistance was broken has proven false once again. So what is actually happening on the Lebanese Zionist border, and what does this mean for Lebanon's future?
Well, I agree with much of what Mr. Takriti mentioned, because he put his finger on the wound in a way. There is the problem. There is a Hezbollah, which is a militia that is not under the control of the government in a way, and it's an ally of Iran. But nevertheless, Hezbollah was the force which fought against Israel and forced Israel out and to withdraw from Lebanon. So Hezbollah has been playing a role. And the other danger is that we are seeing yes, Lebanon is divided on this issue. There are those who see Hezbollah as part of the problem, while there are others who say Hezbollah is defending the country when the government is not able to. But what we are seeing, and that is the danger. I think Mr. Takriti mentioned a very good point, which is important one also, that almost all the neighbors of Israel are facing problems, but it goes beyond that. I mean, we saw the map that Netanyahu put when he came and spoke at the United Nations, when he showed that is part of Saudi Arabia is part of Israel, part of Iraq, huge part of Syria, Jordan, part of Lebanon, up to the Litani River. And now it looks like this is what one of the targets that the Israelis have in mind. They want the control of the Litani River, as they also want the oil and gas. There are huge amounts in that area, the Mediterranean. So that is another part of the problem. But I think the bigger problem is that you're seeing is that instead of helping Lebanon, where Israel has been violating the truce and attacking Lebanon. And ultimately, we saw this reaction that's taking place right now. And just before I came here, I don't know how accurate it is, but there was a report that there were huge demonstrations in Tel Aviv. People opposed the government and wanting peace. And this is something we haven't seen in a while. In fact, most of the demonstrations we had seen earlier are supporting the government of Israel. And we saw, as mentioned, what happened also, the interview between Carlson and Huckabee. Huckabee said that parts of Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia would be a part of Israel. And when he was pushed by Carlson, he said that he himself sees that this is it's up to Israel, the right of Israel to take and these territories, these areas. This is the ambassador of the United States in Israel. It raises a question: was he the ambassador of the United States to Israel, or is he the ambassador of Israel to the United States? And this is one of the issues that's concerned. The president believed that this war is going to be based on the shock and awe, as was the case in Iraq and other places. But what we have seen since then is that now things are not going the way that he hopes. For example, his attack on the Europeans. On the one hand, he says the Europeans, we've asked them, and he said when they asked, he said that he was testing them to see if they are willing to support the United States. And then in another part, when he was answering another question today, he said that that he was very much disappointed with the Europeans because the U.S. defended them, they didn't defend it. And here probably Professor Hammoud would help us with about the NATO, the fifth. What do you call it? Part of the treaty that allies would come to your support if you are attacked, but not necessarily when you are attacking other countries. And this is something that also reflects the tensions that had existed, partly as the tariffs that were placed and put on European countries, then the claim for claiming Greenland talking about also taking part of Canada or the whole Canada. And probably he believed that he could do in Iran what he did in Venezuela. But I think the situation there is very different. I think what we are witnessing now is a sort of an earthquake to the international security system, to the international economy, and also we're seeing the way people travel. Some in Houston, they were waiting 5 hours before passengers were able to get on the plane. The dependence on oil is becoming a factor. The rise in prices of basic goods not only for even in the United States, but how about its effects on poorer countries? The whole idea of trade, what kind of trade and how trade is going to be dealt with from now on. The strategic alliances. So in a way, that's why in part the Europeans, they have had their problems with Washington also. And that's why they have not come to the support of the U.S. So I think we are seeing dramatic changes. We are likely to see these dramatic changes taking place down the road.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. And now back to you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Of course, when we speak about this war, a lot of people are mentioning international humanitarian law, which prohibits attacks on medical personnel and civilian infrastructure. And we have heard the reports of 12 medical workers killed in a single day in Lebanon. And also the UN has documented attacks on schools, hospitals, and residential areas in this regional war. Now, where is the International Criminal Court? Where is the international community? Or has international law simply been suspended, not just for this war, way before when the genocide in Gaza actually started?
Well, you could easily say it is missing in action for the obvious reason that you have a dominant power, that is the United States, who is backing Israel, the Jewish state. And this entity has been getting away with murder. That's the obvious. But there are some things happening on the ground that the indictment of the International Criminal Court of Netanyahu, of the genocide that is happening in Israel, these are well documented documents that will stay there for the world to see. There are the demonstration that we've seen in the street, the reaction to the genocide in Gaza, to what's happening today in American politics. All of this are important, and as if the international community is now voicing its dismay of the lack of adopting international law through its own way, demonstrating the street and registering its vote. But in the end, we are sort of under the control of this Western view of international order, so that it seems like, as Mandela once said, that he was surprised how in our age the victim is asked to understand, or the oppressor or the oppressed is being asked to understand the predicament that his oppressor is in. Meaning that we are asked, either as Palestinians or anyone, to understand the plights of the Israelis with the United States. And, Ishaq Rabin used to tell Arafat that if I give you some land below a double digit, my government will collapse. So for Yasser Arafat has to understand that. And this is sort of the complexity of the international order, of the lack of treating all member states equally, or for that matter, anyone in the world equally.
Thank you indeed. Now, there is another war that has not gone away, actually. Ukraine. As the US diverts attention, munitions, and political capital to the Middle East, Kiev is watching with growing concern. The US is moving 2,000 Marines from Japan to the Gulf, depleting the Pacific by so doing. European allies are distracted, and Russia is watching. And here, let me ask you this question, Mr. Lawrence Walker. Energy markets actually connect these conflicts, and if the Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted, European gas prices will spike. If European gas prices spike, the cost of replacing Russian gas becomes prohibitive, let's say. So does this war in the Middle East actually benefit Russia, according to you, by making European sanctions perhaps unsustainable?
I mean, it certainly benefits Russia in terms of pricing. As you mentioned, yes, prices have spiked a lot. We're at elevated levels to where we were a few weeks ago. This is obviously going to help Russia. It's a global market, so if they're exporting wherever they happen to be exporting their energy to, this is a benefit. Whether it means any kind of relaxation of sanctions, I'm not so sure. This is something which has been in the making for a long time, obviously since 2022. There was, the ban on seaborne oil. There's been the ban on seaborne coal. We've been reducing pipeline imports. Next year, we're going to phase out LNG completely from Russia. So the ball's in motion. It's rather hard to stop. I think also Russia perhaps may not want to continue supplying anyway. I mean, we've heard Putin speaking last week, saying, we need to ramp up already our exports to emerging nations, to non-European countries, since Europe doesn't want our oil and gas anymore. So I think I'm not sure it will benefit them in that we will sort of decide, to say, we'll start importing Russian gas again, we'll start importing Russian oil again. It will benefit them obviously through prices. They will, they'll be able to sell at a premium in a market which is a lot tighter. It's obviously we're missing 20% at the moment of global LNG supply. That's a fair chunk, and Europe obviously will struggle more because it will have to pay more for its energy as well. I don't think we're going to have a shortage of energy. I think we're going to just have to pay a lot more for our energy, and that is, that again, you could perhaps argue would benefit Russia, because you may see some demand destruction in Europe. You may see other issues with our industry as a result of these high prices. So I think it's I would say that I don't think we're going to roll back on sanctions, but certainly there are benefits for Russia, yes.
But then, Mr. Lawrence, from an energy perspective still, Europe is indeed in a desperate situation, and it has spent the last 2 years weaning itself off Russian gas, only to find that Middle Eastern gas is now threatened by war. So what could be the alternatives, according to you? Can Europe survive a prolonged disruption in the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes, I mean, again, like I've just said, it will be, it's going to be a cost thing. It's going to cost more money. It's going to and potentially be damaging for industry, for the economies. There are other supplies. We've already ramped up imports of gas from LNG from America, for example, massively. I mean, I think last year it made up nearly 60% of our LNG imports. In terms of Middle Eastern supply, Qatar is obviously the main gas supplier we'll be talking about here. I think that's maybe made up about 10, 11, or maybe even less. I think maybe less than 10% of our LNG imports last year. So it's replaceable for sure, at a cost, as we'd say. I think obviously the fact is we'd obviously been depending on there being more. Qatar's planning to bring more gas online over the coming years. I think to massively increase their exports, and I suppose to some extent the loss of Russian gas would be ultimately replaced to some extent by this growing Qatari supply. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts. But I think we got that. We have Algerian gas coming here. We have still a third of the gas coming from Norway, which is fairly solid. And so yes, we're going to just have to look elsewhere in the meantime. And obviously, the longer this goes on, though, the more we're going to have to pay for it, and the effects will show as time goes by.
Yeah, thank you indeed. Meanwhile, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, and strategically speaking, what does really this mean for Ukraine? The US perhaps has a finite number of munitions, a finite amount of political attention, and also a finite tolerance for casualties. So if this war drags on, does Ukraine become the forgotten front, according to you? And if so, does that hand a victory to Russia by default?
Depends how you look at it. Well, Gaza is absent from the scene, but it's still in the mind of a lot of people. I think the Ukraine poses a problem. It was very interesting today when President Donald Trump had his press conference or getting together with the journalists, that he had his vice president Vance by his side. Vance, for example, has been silent on the issue of Iran, of this war. But he also represents a wing in perhaps looking at his future nomination or running for the presidency, who has a bit of a different view when it comes to the war in general, but also in Ukraine. So whether Ukraine will be forgotten or not, the relationship that exists between also Trump and the Russian President Putin has to be also factored in here. As we know, India got a permission or a waiver to sell oil to Russia for a 30-day period, and there are discussions about lifting some sanctions against sanction levied against Russia for such benefits and to pour more oil in the market. So the United States is acting on its own interests, but personal ties that exist between the President Trump and Russian leader are a factor here. And what we've seen in recent, since this administration came to power, this is the administration that came in and say, you pay me for all the support we gave you. You pay me either in dollars or in land or in a mineral of your land. So it's many ways transactional. So the idea that this will disappear from the scene is likely, but it doesn't mean that the issue will disappear. Certainly, there are some legitimate questions that have to be addressed in the Ukraine. One of them is Russian ensuring or wanting to ensure that it has its national security protected. So I don't see it. I mean, yes, it may disappear for a while, but it's also a very complex issue, and it delves right into American domestic politics, how this administration is looking at this issue, and maybe this is, and in the end, can America sustain what amounts to two wars? And you could add that Israel as another factor, because the United States has not stopped supporting Israel and Palestine. And for that matter, the ammunition it is providing to the Israelis during this time.
So it's not just two fronts. So, Dr. Gharib, historically, great powers have often found themselves fighting on two fronts. The US now faces potential escalation with Iran while still committed to Ukraine. How do great powers manage this, according to you? And what does it say about American overreach that it cannot handle two conflicts simultaneously?
It's very difficult, really, to handle two fronts at the same time, because that means you are going to be diverting your attention from one front to the other. We're seeing, for example, as you pointed out earlier, what the moving 2,500 Marines to the Middle East from Japan. For example, also the THAAD system, basically it's been dismantled in South Korea to be sent to the Middle East. Another issue is the U.S. apparently, how accurate it is, but I don't know, but I've been hearing this from a number of military analysts, including those who served in the government, both in Biden's government and in Trump's previous government, who are saying that the U.S. is running out of the missiles, that partly because of the missiles that were sent to Ukraine and the ones that were sent to Israel also during the earlier war, the June war of last year. So basically that's another issue. So it's not easy. This is one of the problems of the collapse of empires, in fact. If you take a look, whether it's the Roman Empire, whether it's Arab empires, Arab Muslim empires, whether it is British or the French, when you begin to fight on a number of fronts, and that ultimately brings you down. You also, another important thing is you begin to have problems within your own system. You have the Roman Empire basically moved from being a republic to an empire. Also, there was a lot of corruption, and then there was the military extension began to go almost in all over directions, whether not only in Europe to Britain and to Spain and but to Africa, to Asia, all over to the known world almost at that time. So all of these have have their weight, and they reflect something about the problems that exist within the political system in these societies. So, and this is what's been happening time and time again all over. But the United States has the capability. The U.S. is a country that has its own resources, many resources. It has many intelligent people, intellectuals. It has technological people come from all over the world to the United States. Although now, after some of the policies of President Trump, many are not coming. Many are not. Many people used to come to study in U.S. universities. Many have actually stopped. Now, because of what had been going on earlier with foreign students, with cracking down on the protests, especially those supporting the Palestinian cause. In addition to that, the way ICE, for example, treated, which is the security system, border security, was treating the illegal borders, and where Americans were killed in the streets. So, and this led to major demonstrations all over the country. So basically, I think what we are seeing, it's not easy to continue to fight on two wars. And this is part of the problem. There are many people, that's part of the differences also between Europe and the United States. The Europeans are very fearful of Russia, whether that's legitimate or not, whether they believe Russia is really going to invade Europe, I don't know, but the Western Europe. But nevertheless, whether they believe it, whether it's true or not, if they believe it, it's important. But they hope the United States would play a role. Now the United States is demanding the Europeans to pay for weapons that the United States wants to send to Ukraine. And so this is one of the problems that also has led to the tensions with the Europeans, and the Europeans saying this war, the Norwegian prime minister, the Canadian, the other, they're saying this is not our war. So basically, this is something that we are beginning to see. That's why I think it's important now to see if there is a chance to bring an end to this conflict through mediation. The president says the Iranians are talking to us. The Iranians deny this. There have been reports that Witkoff has been trying to contact Larijani, the foreign minister, every day, but Larijani has not responded. So basically, the Iranians are making their own demand. They want to have the right to have their own nuclear power but for civilian purposes. They also want an end to the sanctions, and they want guarantees that if they accept to end the war right now, there would not be another war against them a few months or a couple of years down the road. They want guarantees. So these are some of the issues where perhaps other countries, India, maybe even Russia, could play a role.
And speaking of India, Dr. Gharib, let me address this last question to Dr. Atikriti. From a global South perspective, there is some kind of an irony here. So the West demanded that the world choose sides on Ukraine. Sanctions, isolations, condemnation for those who didn't fall in line. Now the West itself is divided, distracted, and unable to focus. Now, does this not expose the hypocrisy at the heart of the rules-based order, according to you?
I think that we need to be careful when using words such as hypocrisy when we're talking about global politics. I think that hypocrisy has always been the name of the game, as much as certain systems wish to present that they are value-based, but ultimately speaking, when push comes to shove, when it comes to interests against values, I believe that interests usually win. So I'd be careful on that front. But what you pose is an important point. And that is that we're talking about a war where the West thought that it was won, that it was robust. You know, NATO was the largest military coalition that the world knew. And yet it just took an election in the United States to see that totally unraveled. Let's not forget, I mean, I'm no fan of Putin nor of Moscow, but at the same time, you have to admit that it was NATO that kept on provoking Russia by advancing its missiles and opening new frontiers, and the invitation to Ukraine to join NATO was the last straw. And therefore, Europe can't wash its hands from being blamed for provoking Russia into invading Ukraine. Now, Europe might have hedged its bets on the fact that the United States was with them. That might have been true before Trump. But then you have Trump, and all of a sudden you have a totally different dynamics. So, yes, you're absolutely right. There is an irony there. I wouldn't blame countries for certain countries from the Southern Hemisphere for smirking at this moment of time and at the predicament that Europe finds itself. But also, by the way, I mean, we have to note that one of the issues that has been slowly strangulating Europe, particularly over the course of the past probably 10 years, 12 years, is the rise of the far right and far right narratives, and far right narratives that transcend politics into public life. Now, if you, I recall well when Ukraine outbroke and the Russians invaded, that Britain, for instance, amongst other European countries, opened its doors to Ukrainian refugees, and even invited British households to open their houses for those refugees in such a heartwarming gesture. I would say that's how human beings deal with each other. However, when it came to the predicament of those under genocide in Gaza, it was a totally different story. And when comparisons were being drawn, why Russia was being painted as being an invader against the victims of Ukraine, whilst the same can't be seen in the case of Israel and Palestine, obviously Europe had no response. But most importantly now is the fact that now we don't have a Western Hemisphere anymore. We don't have that alliance, whether it be in terms of the international institutions that used to govern this order, or whether it be in terms of the regimes who can or used to be able to speak with each other in the past. So I think that we are in a very, very strange place. I think like I said earlier, that the world is in flux. Probably this escapade against Iran is probably the straw that might break the camel's back. But in any case, I don't think that what is to emerge after this will be the same as what we had just before.
Thank you indeed, Dr. Anas At-Takriti, for all those insights. A big thank you also goes to Dr. Edmund Gharib for all the insights and analysis you provided. Thank you as well, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, for all your insights and analysis. And the same thanks goes to Mr. Lawrence Walker for being with us tonight at this late hour. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 3 weeks ago, this war began with a feeling. Today, that feeling has become a global crisis indeed, and the world has rendered its verdict. 10 countries were asked to join America. 10 countries said no. The empire that once commanded the world's respect, that once could assemble a coalition overnight, now begs in vain. The Strait of Hormuz is not blockaded, it is filtered. And the filter accepts only yuan, not dollars. The petrodollar, the foundation of American economic power since 1971, is bleeding out in the waters of the Gulf, and yet no end in sight. So, thank you for trusting us with your time, and until next time, have a good one.